Let's see how the modify panel of our object is structured. We have changed the parameters of this object, defined as parametric 1. When we create a parallelepiped, it is defined by parameters: width, length, depth, further to infos concerning the subdivisions, and so on. Let's analyze these windows and notice that here above there is our object name. We can rename it in this way. On the right we can click to define the color of the object. We can define it from an AutoCAD palette or from a 3ds Max 1. We can define a custom color, or we can select them with the color pickers. We notice that there is a drop-down menu which contains the modifiers list. I suggest to do a lot of practice and match tests on simple objects. The modifiers list is big. It contains many voices about modification of our objects inside the space. These modifiers make easier the creation of complex volumes. Let's make an example. Let's make our parallelepiped higher. That has been changed from its original dimension through scaling that changed the number of subdivisions. This to give you an idea of what a modifier is. Let's apply a modifier, for example the bend. Bend allows us to change the curving of our object based upon a direction and an angular parameter, an axis that could be the x1, the y, or the z1. This allows us to make a simpler starting point for additional specific operations. Here is how looks our object after the bending. I didn't have to change manually the position of all its points in the space, which will make the name of vertices, but I just applied a modifier on my object, by applying a modifier from the modifier list. Modifiers can be applied one by one in the same way of Photoshop levels. Let's see now the bend is selected and how we can apply another modifier. For example, we can use the WFD modifier, one of the most used with 3ds Max. It allows us to select control points inside an object and to move them by making a silhouette of our three-dimensional object. It's a really useful and funny tool. I remind you that with the control button it's possible to add elements to our selection. Here are how our object looks under the effect of these two modifiers. Box, bend, WFD 444, free from the former. Good. Let's see how it's possible now to work on sub-object level. I have an obsession for control points. By opening this sub-hierarchy of elements we can select sub-objects. With the bend it's possible to move the curving center. We notice how the modifier of a modifier affects the other one who follow. If we go back to our main object named as box, we can change the number of subdivisions. At the beginning I raised them up because I knew what type of modifier I was going to use. At this point we can go to make a sort of optimization of our three-dimensional object by changing the values. Here is how our object looks after the modifications. As you can see, I can step from a modifier to another one, keeping always the final visualization of the object. This is because I selected previously this option, Show End Result, which allows to visualize the final result of the entire modifier stack applied to the object, in every point we are, so in every level. Don't worry, the settings are not lost, but are not shown because we came back to our main object. If I apply the bend modifier, here is how our object looked, and here with the FFD modifier applied without the bend one. Generally I suggest to keep this voice enabled, show end result, because it allows to make particular manipulations. In this case I made the optimization of my object seeing the final result from the various modifiers. To delete a modifier you just have to select it and press Del from the keyboard or remove modifier from the stack. In this way the modifier is deleted. We delete also the FFD one to come back to the initial situation.